So everyone should have a gospel tract and a listening guide. You don't have to take notes. If you do take notes, though, it makes it easier to just fill a blank in. Obviously, the Go Fish is, by the way, it's not my main personal evangelism teaching, but I love it. It's a good one. And obviously, the Go Fish is from Mark 1:17. Jesus told his disciples, "Follow me, I'll make you fishers of men." And by the way, Jesus would never call it this, but in our day we call that an elevator speech because that's all you do. You do nothing as a believer that does not fit in there somewhere. Following is being discipled, with worshiping, serving, reading the Bible. There's nothing spiritual you do as a believer that does not fit under following. And the fishing is simply introducing people who do not follow Jesus, introducing them to the gospel. And how they can start this relationship too. So it's just interesting that in one sentence he said so much. And let me just say this also: the follow me and make you fishers of men. That's passion driven and purpose defined. Passion driven, purpose defined. There's a book that was written about 25 years ago. A great book. It's called The Purpose Driven Life. It's a great book. It's a terrible title. You do not want to be purpose driven. You want to be passion driven. If you're purpose-driven, what happens is that you reach a stage, let's just say in the believer's life, you reach a stage where you'll say this: I'm not going to work in children's ministry anymore. I've served my time, almost like you've been paroled and you don't have to do it anymore. But no one ever says, I love ice cream, but I've eaten enough of my share. You'll eat ice cream even if the doctor tells you not to. Paul said, the love of Christ compels us. Paul was passion driven. And if you'll think about this, and by the way, it's interesting how he did this. He didn't say, hey, the world is lost, which we know Jesus knew that because he makes statements later about the fields are white to harvest. He talks about the road to heaven is narrow. Very few people get on the right road. The road to hell is broad. Many people get on that road. So he knew the world was lost. But it's interesting, he doesn't say, why don't y'all come fishing with me for souls? And one of these days I'm going to teach you how to really love me. And the reason he didn't do that is this: spiritual, apathetic people don't witness. They don't. People who are apathetic don't witness. But if you have passion, you'll talk about something. For example, I travel. I'm somewhere almost every week. In fact, not just every week. I'm usually somewhere 2-3 times a week preaching or training. And total strangers come up to me and they'll say something like this. They're about to start saying this towards the end of the summer. Did you see those Bulldogs? Or they'll name some kind of team. They're assuming I like sports, which I do, but they don't know that. I was in South Georgia about 6 weeks ago, not way South Georgia, far enough where I get up on Saturday morning and drive to do a training. I stopped by McDonald's close to the church that they're at, and a guy walks in, and I was close enough to the counter. I was sitting down, but I was close enough to hear him place his order. It was to go, so he came in and placed the order. And he had the waiting moment. He's probably 65 years old. He looked at me a couple of times, kind of glanced over. He walks over and took his iPhone out. I've never met him, don't know anything about him. And he says, have you ever seen a fish that looked any better than this? And I said, that's a nice one. He's a 12.5 pounds bass. Now, I will tell you, as you can tell by looking at me, I'm fairly old. I have never in my life walked up to a stranger, nor someone I know, and say, you ever seen a fish like this? I don't like the fish. And if you don't have the passion to fish, you don't talk about it. And if someone paid me to do that, if it's enough money, I might would do it, but I wouldn't like it. And the day I didn't have to do it, I'd probably say, sure, I'll serve my time, let me move on to something else. Jesus said, follow me. If you're passion driven, it's why people come to me all the time and strangers, hey, let me show you my new grandbaby. Now, they weren't trained to do that. They didn't come to a course like this. They simply did it. The one at the well had never been trained. In fact, the one at the well did not know near what we know because she just got saved. But she went back to town with passion and told everybody, I just met somebody who changed my life. And so that's a good thing to know. One of the reasons we don't quite witness like we should, sometimes we have other things in our life that rise above our passion for Jesus. But that's why he says follow me, because if you're passionate pursuing Jesus, by the way, he doesn't say if you follow me, you might witness. he uses a very strong word. He says, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishermen." And again, no one had to tell that stranger how to talk about fish. He's obviously, he must really be passionate about fishing to walk up to a total stranger and have to show me a fish. Which I didn't tell him this. I had no interest in looking at it, didn't care anything about it, but he had a passion about it. And so we want to pursue Jesus, be passion driven, and we want to be purpose defined. We want the gospel to flow from us. One of the reasons we don't witness, one reason, is because we have a misconception. It's one reason that the average person probably wouldn't come in here after church. They'd rather go somewhere else, because there's really just not any interest in it. Because to them it's like, why would I go to a lunch and learn about talking about Jesus? Because there's a fear, or they have a misconception. They think that talking about Jesus is a very unnatural thing. But when you look at the life of Jesus, what you see is he basically had conversations. Just like the guy has a conversation about the fish, or someone who's natural passionate about football. They don't ask me, hey, before I talk to you about this, do you like sports? If you don't want to talk about it, they just say something like, man, I thought those Braves were going to lose, and they had to go extra innings to win it. And I may not be a baseball fan. They don't care. The passion overrides anything else. I may not want to look at a photo of a grandbaby of a stranger I don't know. It may not make any difference to me, but it does to them, because passion overrides every single thing. And so let's jump into this and talk about this some today. Of course, the first 2 blanks, follow Jesus and fish for people. And I always like to include that, because if your passion is not like it should be, then you might not talk about it like you need to. And the problem is this. The problem is, we know this from surveys. First of all, Georgia's lost, and that's true of every state in the United States. Georgia's lost. About 75%, the best we can tell, of our state is lost, which means this: no matter where I live, there's lost people around me. There's no town that could say, for example, nobody could say in their right mind, Cleveland is 100% safe. It's impossible. There's no doubt about it. It's not. We know that through surveys we do. We know that through questions we ask. The sad thing about lostness is not just the fact someone's lost. That's really sad. The sad thing is, when you do surveys, the average adult lost person, like about 9% of America, has never had anybody one-on-one talking about Jesus. I do this all the time, and so I often have people come up to me, and they'll say something like this. They'll say, I really feel convicted. This is actually happening today. Really feel convicted. I worked 35 years at the factory, and I talked about deer hunting and duck hunting and the weather and the Braves, and he named a few things. And I think he's being sincere. He said, it never dawned on me. As I look back, I think most of those men I worked with are lost. I guess I should have been praying for them. And I guess I should have been, or people come up and say, I really feel convicted. I've lived by my neighbor for 35 years, and I know that in the church, and quite frankly, we've had so many conversations about everything except we've never talked about church or Jesus. That's a very common thing, and probably some in here would say that you just described me. I talk about everything to neighbors and coworkers and people at the grocery store, but I've never broached that. So let me throw this out to you and show you how serious it is. So if I asked you this question, if I said, is there anybody here who knows every single person by name in White County? You'd say, well, of course not. In other words, if we left today, went to the nearest grocery store and stood in the parking lot, and every time somebody went in and went out and said, who is that? How long would it take you before you said, I have no clue who that is? Here's why I ask you that. Since there's so many churches, and you don't know everybody in White County, which means they don't know you either, you probably, like me, have strangers sometimes say, something like gas station, they say, boy, this gas is high. They talk. When was the last time anyone here, well, let's just say the last 12 months, has anyone here in the last 12 months had a stranger make a statement like gas is high, the weather is hot, or it's cool, and then say, hey, by the way, I don't know if you go to church anywhere, but I go to such and such church. Because since they don't know you, and you're in this county, as far as they know, you live in this county. How many of you have been invited to church by a total stranger in your county the last 12 months?
Yeah.
Now, you said, yeah, like it's common. 2 hands went up. I will tell you this. About 2 out of 100 hands go up out of 100 people. I taught 86 people the other day. Nobody raised their hand. Isn't that strange? If you didn't know that, you probably think it's very common. Oh, it's not that nobody invites people. It's there's so few people that do that. I didn't do this driving in. The other day I did this. I stopped a quick trip before I went to the church, bought a cup of coffee, and I asked the lady, I said, hey, do me a favor. I asked you a quick question. I'm about to go do some training. How long have you worked here? She said, about 6 years. I said, last question. In 6 years, and this town I was in is like this town, churches everywhere. I said, in 6 years, how many times has somebody invited you to church? He went, none. Which is very common anyway. But it's shocking when people hear that. And so the stakes are high, and I'll just say one thing, we'll go into this. If you were lost and you were from an unchurched family, if the believers that you hang around, you work with, you see them at the convenience store, you see them at a high school football game, you see them at the gym, if they witness like you do, would you ever get to hear the gospel, or would you just die lost? If you're like the average believer, that you probably would die lost, because the average believer never ever takes the risk of sharing Christ with somebody. So just to say, that's what we're about. It's why we're left on earth. It's a tremendous thing to do. So let's get into this. Number one, you are an ambassador. You are an ambassador. Let's read this real quick. You're an ambassador. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, since God is making his appeal through us. We plead on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. Say a quick word about being an ambassador. Being an ambassador takes a lot of pressure off me. Because if God said, listen, you're on your own, think of some story that would save somebody. Well, I might not be creative, I might not be a storyteller. But you don't invent a story. The gospel's the gospel. And an ambassador, I haven't looked this up in a while, but we have around 282 ambassadors, I think, in the U.S. So if our president sent you to Mexico, you don't ever tell anybody what you think. No offense, we don't care what you think. When they ask you a question like, what is the official economic policy of the United States? You would never say, well, I'll tell you that in just a moment. I'll tell you what I think. Because if you did that, you'd get fired. By the way, if you work for somebody like Russia, you might get killed. You don't speak what you think. When God says we're an ambassador, what God's telling me is, they don't need to know what you think. The gospel is a simplistic message. You didn't write it. You didn't make it up. It's what happened. It's the death, burial, resurrection of Christ. So important, the Apostle Paul would say to one group, when I came to you, I determined not to know anything except Jesus Christ and crucified. That's interesting, because I'd be tempted, if I was Paul at that stage of his life, because he's a senior adult, I'd be tempted to say, let me talk about laying hands on Eutychus. He did. He got resurrected. They ain't going to save anybody. He didn't talk about anything to lost people except the power of the gospel and what the cross means. And so we're ambassador. I've been doing this a long time. I would not elevate witnessing like Paul did if it wasn't in Scripture. He takes it up so high. Did you catch what he said? Paul said it's as though God makes his appeal through you. So if Paul was here in a physical body and I said, hey, Paul, the other day I was at a coffee shop in there and got to share Jesus, Paul might say, it really wasn't you. Yeah, it's a coffee shop, I was there. Paul says, oh, that was God. You catch what he says? It says, though God's making an appeal through you. Now, I've said that probably 1,000 times in my life. No one ever says amen. It's an exciting thing because we're a little bit shocked. We're like, okay. But we believe it. We just don't believe it about ourselves. You ever left a church service and you heard someone say, man, God really spoke through the pastor today? Paul said, you're right. But it's better than that. Every believer God will speak through. And that's what Paul's saying. That when I was at the coffee shop the other day, Paul's saying, that really wasn't you making an appeal. That was God himself using your mouth and your body to present the gospel message. So what does that mean? What it means is, my wife's a third grade teacher. What it means is, and by the way, she witnesses a lot. I have to work to witness like her because this is what I do. So I have to witness at the grocery store, the gym. she's every day around lost people. So she's always, I don't know, as the week goes by that she doesn't text me. It's normally a text where she'll say pray. She'll name somebody. It's a mother of a student. It's a school teacher that works with her. The other day she texted me and said pray for so and so. She's a first year teacher, 22 years old. This is my wife's way of saying this. I've sowed seeds all year. But she just texted me and said, could we meet after school tomorrow? She said, I've done this too much. I know what she wants. She wants a long discussion about how she can get saved. So I say to say this. My wife, and is there any teachers in here? Well, here's what I know about teaching from her. So this is just me watching her. My wife loves teaching. In fact, she'll teach at summer school this year. She's at probably 15 years. I always tell her, when I take a summer off, she likes teaching. She likes the money too, but she likes teaching. So what I've learned is from her friends, it's almost like they either love it or they hate it and they're hanging on until they can retire. Well, she loves it. I say it to say this. Although she loves it, I've never seen her in the morning get up and say, I'm so excited I get to teach my third grade multiplication table. She often gets up and says, hey, would you pray a special prayer over me before I leave? I have a meeting after school with a parent, and I've been sowing the gospel. I think I'm gonna have an opportunity to really. I mean, she's like on tiptoes, like, you know why? Because if you believe what Paul's saying, you're not just a plumber, you're an ambassador that flows through so many people's homes. You're not just an electrician, not just a school teacher. You're not just whatever it is you do for a living or a retired person. You're an ambassador, which means when I get up tomorrow, I have no clue what God might allow me to do when I buy a cup of coffee or whatever. I mean, it may be the best day of someone's life tomorrow, and I get to be a part of it. Because the best day of my life, I've had to good with getting married, all those things, that's great. But nothing touches the day I got saved, and nothing ever will. So you can be a part of that. Why? Because God says if you're a believer, you're an ambassador. And by the way, the choice now for me is, as a believer, am I going to be a good ambassador, or am I going to be a poor ambassador? And a good ambassador always represents the one who sends him. Number 2 says this, the gospel is good news. And this is interesting to me. We should obey God regardless because he's God. But it's not like God says, now that you're a believer, I need you to go tell everyone the worst news that nobody's going to hear. The gospel is good news. All God says is, now that you're a believer, I want you to tell people the greatest love story that's ever existed, that God so loved the world, and the cross is the greatest act of sacrifice in the history of the world. Tell everybody how important they are to God. Well, that's not really a hard thing to do, is it? I supervise people, and if I went in tomorrow, this won't happen. If I went into the office tomorrow and they said, hey, bad news, you need to lay one of your guys off, I won't say this. Good. Man, I can't wait to lay some people off. I'd be like, really? When do I have to do this? I mean, why do I have to do this? If I went in the morning and they said, hey, whenever you have time, so-and-so works in your team, he's going to get a raise. I'm like, when I have time, I'm going to find him right now. I'm going to call him right now. Why? I love sharing good news. So why would I not get up tomorrow? And by the way, this is one of my prayers almost every day. Lord, help me in the smallest way. It doesn't matter. The largest way, it doesn't matter. To be your ambassador. I have no idea who I'm going to meet when I wake up tomorrow. Don't know where I'm going to go. Don't know what I may see or get into. Don't know what kind of conversation I may have. But somehow help me bring those conversations back to the Lord Jesus. And I'll just say this. I always feel good when the day's over if I've had some kind of opportunity to pray for someone or to share a little bit about Jesus. Maybe part of the gospel, but just have a little bit of opportunity to talk about how awesome and how wonderful Jesus. So the gospel is good news. And the verse there is 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4. And this is the gospel. Gospel simplicity. And when I say this about the gospel, I say this. The more you know about Scripture, you just have to be cautious. Because what will happen is lost people, either intentionally or unintentional, they'll pull you off. Where it came to is why. In my mind, I'm thinking, you're going to hell. It don't matter. It don't matter where it came. If you die today, it don't matter where dinosaurs from. It just doesn't matter. That may be okay to talk about one day. What that person needs to hear is the love story. That Jesus died, that he rose again, that he's living, and that you can find life through him. And so Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, 1 through 4, he talks about the death, the burial, and resurrection of Christ. And that's going to be those three blanks that are coming up. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the life of Jesus. He never sinned. I want to talk about the life of Jesus. Very simplistic message, but the life of Jesus. Secondly, I want to talk about the death of Jesus, what that death means. And so on the death of Jesus, I may use a verse like the 2 Corinthians 5:21 verse, that God made Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. And I'm going to say something like this. I'm going to say, and let me tell you how the good news that is. What that verse means is, and it's not fair, it could make you upset that God did this. God treated Jesus as though Jesus lived my life, so that if I, through faith and repentance, accept Jesus, God treats me as though I live Jesus' life. Now, that's not fair. And by the way, if it was fair, we wouldn't have sung Amazing Grace today. We'd say Amazing Works, or, I got what I deserve. No, we don't get what I deserve. It's grace. That's why Jude, and you see this in other verses, but say Jude, the end of his book, it's just one chapter, he has that great doxology. That doxology, he says this. He says, to him, he's talking about God, to him who's able to keep us from stumbling, and listen to this, and to present us faultless before his throne with joy. If you pause at what Jude is saying and don't understand grace, you might leave that congregation saying, that's an arrogant man. You hear what he just said? Because what he just said was, hey, when I stand before God at his throne, I'm not going to have any fear. I'm going to have, and by the way, it's not just joy, there's an adjective, exceeding joy. Because God's going to look at me and say, no fault! And I would assume that there's a church member there who didn't like Jude. They might leave and say, that's arrogant. Who does he think he is? What Jude is saying is that because of grace, God treated Jesus on the cross like he lived Jude's life. And now that Jude's a Christian, God looks at Jude and says, now I'm going to treat you as though you have the righteousness of Jesus. That's what grace is all about. So I say that to say, we want to talk about what Jesus did and to talk about the good news. And if you do witness or if you listen to people at all, I'll tell you what you'll find today. There's a lot of emptiness today. In fact, there's just a survey just came out with 2 or 3 things people are concerned about. One is, and by the way, this is not a religious survey, but applies to our witnessing. What's the purpose of life? Well, as a believer, you think you might know part of the purpose of life? Because I think I kind of know what part of the purpose of life is. The purpose of life is that between the time you're born and die, you better get to know Jesus. That is the purpose. That is the ultimate purpose. Jesus came that you might have life and have it more abundantly. The second question was, why is there evil in the world? Well, nobody can completely explain evil, but we do understand that because of free will, there has to be evil. Because if I have a choice of choosing Jesus, I have a choice of not choosing Jesus. The third question was, what happens when I die? It's interesting that secular people with a secular survey given across the nation would ask 3 questions. It's like, I actually could preach a 3-week series on that from the Bible. That would be a great series. Why? Because it's tremendous questions that people have. And so we want to answer those questions and also talk about the death of Jesus and what it meant. And let me just say this. We don't think of this too often. The death of Jesus is what saves. It's not the resurrection. Resurrection proves he's God. The Bible doesn't say without a resurrection there's no salvation. It says about the shedding of blood. The lambs that were killed in the Old Testament that kept pointing towards an ultimate sacrifice, it's the death of Jesus. And so we focus on the fact that Christ died for us. Paul says it's an offense. And I'll tell you why it's an offense. It's an offense because in my own strength, I want to believe I'm good enough. I want to believe I've done more good things than bad things. I want to believe that somehow because I've given money, because I've tried to treat people pretty well, in my own small mind, my own understanding. And the offense of the cross is you're not good enough. You could never be good enough. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And so we major on the death, and then of course we do end with that third blank, the resurrection of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus. And so that's the gospel. And by the way,
when we talk about this, there's not usually very many amens. Why? It's such a simplistic message. I'm going to tell you something interesting. I do a lot of harvest events, and this is going to sound strange, Pastor, what I'm about to say. So I do a lot of harvest events. I'll do some events where you might say 30, 40, 50 people say, here's what's interesting. It's not my favorite type of preaching. If nobody gets saved, in fact, my wife was with me not too long ago, and just a really good move of God in church. She got in the car and she said, it's so refreshing to see something like this. And here's what I told her. I said, there's only one problem for what we just saw. She said, what is it? I said, the problem with the message was nobody in that church knows me. And if for some reason God didn't move, because you had college students, you had a lot of people get saved that day. I guess when we left, people would say, that guy can't preach. Because I'm going to tell you, the gospel is so simplistic. I've got messages that I think are pretty good messages, but the gospel is just, here's the message. Jesus died on the cross for you. Here's the message. He rose from the dead. Here's the message. Here's what you need to do. And I'll be honest with you, there's always a little bit of, fear is too strong a word, anxiety a little bit, like, man, these folks don't know me. Because, you can pull out a scripture about prayer and what prayer means to the believer, and you're going to have people listen, oh, man, that's just blessing me there. But when you talk about the gospel, it's just so simplistic. And yet, that is the message that we need to give. Number 3 says this, and I'm going to have to explain what I'm about to say so it's not misunderstood. Fish in your local pond. Fish in your local pond. There's nothing wrong with mission trips. I love mission trips. But we don't live on mission trips. I love to go to another country. I taught, not this, but I taught Friday at Camp Pinnacle. Our WMU has, 40 people, whatever it is. They have 40 people in Georgia Baptist WMU that are part of their executive committee. So I taught them, I taught a session on witnessing. And in talking with them, ate lunch with them before, they're big on missions. And one of the things I told them, it wasn't from this, but I told them, I said, just be cautious and understand, you don't live in Brazil and you don't live in the state of Washington, if that's one of your partnerships. You live in Georgia. And that's why Jesus, when he gave the Great Commission part in Acts 1:8, when he gave the Great Commission, which the Great Commission is so huge, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and Acts all have the Great Commission in there. He gives the Great Commission. And in Acts 1:8, by the way, he gives it. Verse 9 is where they stand and they gaze intently because he's going back up to heaven. He's ascending back. But the last words before he sends in verse 8 is, you should be able to witnesses, and he breaks it down in Jerusalem. There's nothing special about Jerusalem except that's where they live. Had he ascended from here, he would have said, you should be my witnesses, and he would have named this town. In other words, wherever he would have been, Augusta, Athens, it doesn't matter where, he named it because I can't witness where I'm not. And if we're not careful, we can sometimes get excited about once a year I go to El Salvador or something, and that's a great thing. I keep doing that. But that ought not to be the only time we witness. And the reality is, we live on a mission field. People are lost everywhere around us. And I'll tell you one of the most tragic things in life would be, I'll just use me as an example, unless something happens, probably about 4 o'clock tomorrow, I'm going to be at my gym. It would be a shame for me to see people at my gym and maybe see them for 10, 15 years and never ever think about the fact, hey, Steve, are they saved or lost? Well, I don't know unless I talk to them, but I say this, in Georgia, about 75% of people are lost. There's a good chance some people are probably lost. And for me not to broach the subject, because if I go in the more, somebody's going to be talking about, did you see any of the NBA games? Or they're going to be talking about sports probably. And for me not to somehow take some of those conversations back with Jesus and talk to them seems like it'd be a tragic thing. And yet a lot of times we don't take the opportunity to fish in our local pond. In fact, it's how bad it is, Pastor. You've probably seen this. It's so bad that in my ministry, I can't count the number of times in prayer requests someone has said this. Y'all pray for me. The place I work, there's no Christian. Pray to get another job somewhere. And I'm thinking, it might be that God has you in that office or God has you in that factory because they desperately need to hear the hope that is in you. And that word hope was in one of the verses that Pastor preached on this morning about we want to give an explanation of the hope that's within us. And so we want to make sure we're fishing in our own pond. And here's a good way you can tell this. Ask yourself a couple of questions. If there's a place you go, let's just say a coffee shop. Let's say a place you go is a coffee shop, and someone asked you, is there anybody in there that's been working there 2 or 3 years? So yeah. How often do you go? Once a month, twice a month. Tell me something about him or her. If your answer is, I don't know. What you're really saying is, why would I know? Why would I care? What difference does it make? Well, you might care because as a believer, we have to answer the question. The Old Testament asks it this way. Am I my brother's keeper? Actually, you are. I don't like that verse sometimes. You know why? It means I have a responsibility. Or in the New Testament, Jesus tells a classic parable. It's one of the great parables. A lawyer does not like the statement Jesus makes, that the ultimate goal of life is to love God with heart, soul, mind, and strength. By the way, that's passion. We're to be passion-driven, love God, heart, soul, mind, strength. He said, but there's a second right underneath it. Because you won't do the second one unless you do the first one. What's the second one? Love your neighbor yourself. And the Lord's like, oh, who's my neighbor? Because he didn't want to do it. He tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And so, by the way, the story of the Good Samaritan is interesting because the Good Samaritan did not know the guy who'd been robbed. But in his circle of influence, his daily life, he came across a need. So he decided, let me do what I can to meet a human need because I believe in God. And so you have to ask yourself, if that's the case, then what am I doing? For example, my wife last year asked her principal, would it be okay if I had a Bible study, maybe, I don't remember what day it was, every Tuesday or whatever, after school? And the principal said, no problem, we can't make him come. She said, no, you can't make him come. She had maybe 8 or 9 people that came, and when she had her first one, she said, I've identified 6 of those as lost. Here's the question. The question isn't why would she do that? The question is, if she's a believer, why wouldn't she do that? If she's a believer, why wouldn't she look for opportunities? And those are ways that you can kind of know. If you're in a house that's gospel-centered, then there ought to be some conversations occasionally like this. Pray for, and you name a person. I got to share about this much, but I've noticed they've been at the coffee shop. They work there, but this is the first time I've been able to talk to them. So I should have other opportunities. If you say, well, I never had that conversation, then you have to ask yourself, are you witnessing? You have a concern. Here's something we do all the time. If somebody comes to our house, this happened the other day, we had to have a new stove. So if somebody comes to our house, then there's a couple things we do. One thing we do, we begin to pray, Lord, who's coming? Well, you know we don't. Second thing is, we will grab a gospel tract, and I lay it out. And the gospel tract, I lay it out because it's a reminder. And what it tells me, this is just what it tells me. It tells me, don't you dare let somebody come in your house and you don't know who they are without talking about Jesus. This is your house. I mean, you own this house. You have the right to talk about it. And so we do it all the time. And so if I'm going to be gone, sometimes I'll tell my wife, maybe she's off from school, I'll say, hey, the pest control people are coming, tomorrow, don't forget about it. And I'll say something. And sometimes she'll text me and say, don't remind me, I know they're coming tomorrow. And she'll put P.S., the gospel tract's already out. That's because we've decided this is how we should live. I will tell you something interesting because of the type of work I'm in. And this happened with the people in the stove. They all three guys, they're all saved. In fact, I knew the company they work for is a Christian-owned company. It's been around 70 or 80 years. But as I witnessed, I said, we're saved. And they said, in fact, where we work, we actually, every Monday we have about a 30-minute devotion. I said, well, I knew that Mr. Bailey, he's passed away, but I knew when he started he was a Christian. I just always like to check people out. But then I asked this, I said, well, I ask you a question. Y'all going homes, oh man, we'll be 8 or 9 homes today. I said, y'all do this 5 days a week. He's actually, I said, how often does somebody do this? He said, oh man, it occasionally, one guy said, well, I've been here 3 years, and I'm not always with them. It ain't happened, this is the first time I've ever seen this happen. And I do that because I'm thinking, well, this is Lilburn, Georgia, where you are. And of course, they hit all areas of Georgia. there has to be a lot of believers in the house you're going in, but if you're not intentional about fishing, and I promise you this, there are people that will pay good money, sometimes $2,000 or $3,000, to go to Africa for a week or two on a mission trip, and those are good things. But they would not witness to the 3 guys delivering or installing their oven. You mentioned Chuck Kelly being led to Christ by him. So when I was in seminary, I was on staff at First North. He was a member there. I got to know him well. But a mutual friend told me this, said, hey, I've got a really good friend who's a TV repairman. And he said he's a Christian at First Baptist Metairie. And he said he went to Dr. Kelly's house, and Dr. Kelly doesn't know him, but Dr. Kelly's preaching in his church. And he told me, he said, when I went there in my mind, I wanted to know, was he going to witness to me? Because he talked about it all the time. And he said, he called me and said, you won't believe this. I hadn't been there 10 minutes until he began the conversation about, tell me where you live. How long have you lived there? And then he got around the church. And then he said, once he got into broached the subject of church, he took a step back and said, well, that's good you go to church, but now church won't save you. And he went to that, and he finally told Dr. Kelly, he said, hey, I'm very active. In fact, you've been in our church and preach, and now I'm going to be telling people you did this. I wanted to see if you really lived what you preach and stuff. But my point is, that's not just true for Dr. Kelly. That's true for all of us, that we ought to be looking for opportunities to share Christ with people. Wouldn't it be something if I lived to be 80 and I had a friend, maybe I played golf with, and he's about 80, and for 40 years we golfed and whatever. We talked about how bad the Falcons are, and we talked about how good the Bulldogs are, and we talked about this. He dies and goes to hell. And maybe the rest of his life in hell he thinks, I wonder why. Steve's not going to be down here. I wonder why he never talked to me about the Lord. But the reality is, that's actually a story that's true of a lot of people who probably went to church today across Georgia, that they know they're saved, but they just don't think about their doctor. They don't think about their neighbor. They don't think about, and you fill the blank in. It just doesn't cross their mind. And yet, when we look at Jesus, what do we see Jesus? Well, he talks about it, but then we see, and he tells story after story. Hey, a woman has 10 coins. She loses one. And you're thinking, you ain't talking about money. You're talking about souls. You know, a man has 100 sheep. He loses one. You're not talking about sheep. You're talking about souls. You know, man has 2 sons. One goes. You're not talking about biological relationship. You're talking about lost people who need to come to Jesus. That's exactly right. But then we see him. We don't have everything he did, obviously, but what God did give us, we see the well, Nicodemus at night, Zacchaeus sitting in a tree. This is interesting, and I would assume, although we don't know because we don't have everything the disciples did, obviously, I would assume the rest of their life they must have got together like this and sometimes said, I still can't get over it. Man, he was stripped naked and beaten and thorns on his head and spear in his side, and he still told that one thief how to get to heaven. He said that thief is going to be in paradise with him today. And it must have been a motivating thing to think, well, if Jesus could do this, then surely we must be about the business of witnessing too. The next thing is this, and this is maybe the key to making witnessing a lot easier. And the next one is develop evangelistic curiosity. Develop evangelistic curiosity. Let me tell you real quick what this is about. So it really just means to be interested in people. It means to pay attention to people. So if you do, what you'll find there's a lot of conversations that are easy. Let me just say this. There's nothing wrong with walking. I mentioned on the platform day about the World Cup. So the World Cup coming to Atlanta. For most people, unless you do a watch party, it's maybe your neighborhood's coming where you can follow up. A lot of the World Cup is not this type of witnessing. You got gospel. You may just be handing out gospel tracts. We've got little soccer balls with verses on. We've got a lot of things you may be handing out, and you may just be looking for 2 things. One is if someone took a gospel tract or a soccer ball with a verse, and that's all they got. You're praying, Lord, I may never know it this side of heaven, but could you use that verse to really let the Holy Spirit blow across that verse? Or you're passing out tracts, and you're hoping for that one person who might just stop and say, hey, what is this? And that's your opportunity to share just a little bit. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a great way to witness. But a lot of us have opportunities we don't have to do it that way because we're around some of the same people. I see some of the same people. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to see some of the same people I've seen for a long time at my gym. And so I'm able to have conversations that take people certain ways. And so if you look in Scripture, you'll see a curiosity. For example, when Jesus sat down at the well, if you notice this about Jesus, he never really witnessed that we have, the encounters we have, he never witnessed the same way all the time. For example, with Nicodemus, he used a lot of profound thoughts because Nicodemus was a smart guy. You must be born again. He used a lot. We don't see that with like the one at the well. With the one at the well, he says, give me something to drink. And y'all know the story, but he's Jew, she's Samaritan. And also, men in Jesus' day didn't talk to women in public that they didn't know. He didn't do it, but he did. So she says, why would you ask me for something to drink? That's the conversation. You notice he didn't go up and say this. He didn't. When she approached the well, he didn't say, hey, let me ask you a question. If you die today, you're 100% sure you go to heaven or hell. I'm not saying that's a bad question. It's an awkward question, though. It's not as smooth as what he did. Hey, give me something to drink. Why would you ask me for something to drink? He says, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me for something. We don't know how she looked or how she looked to him, but based on the conversation, she must have went, well, Deacon ain't got a rope. He's got her. I'm not talking about that kind of water. And he goes right into the gospel. She gets saved. And so, he had curiosity. Or Acts 8, Philip the evangelist. He walks by a chariot, the Ethiopian eunuch. He sees him reading Scripture. The question I have for myself is, would I notice that? If I did notice it, would I just keep walking and think, the guy's reading the Bible or some scroll? Or would I have enough curiosity to stop? Philip did. And Philip says, do you understand what you're reading? This is a divided point. It doesn't always happen this way. It did for Philip. Response, how can I? Unless somebody explains it. Well, this is interesting because Philip can explain it. And get this. The passage he's reading is Isaiah 53, which is talking about the suffering servant. That Jesus is coming. He's going to suffer for the sins of his people. And so he led him to Christ and got to baptize the Ethiopian eunuch. So let me just say this real quick. If you ever get curiosity, you'll be shocked at what you see. Everybody's different, but like with me, so I'm a very task-oriented person. So before I really worked on the curiosity part a number of years ago, here would be me. I might hear something, like I might buy a cup of coffee somewhere and just, I'm not really saying it for any reason, but might just say, hey, have a good day. And someone said, well, I sure could use one. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I hope you get one. Because I'm thinking, I've got 14-hour day today. I ain't got time. I mean, I'm just saying, I didn't say that, I would think it. Whereas somebody who has curiosity may pause and may ask the question, why would you say that? I probably a couple times a month I get to say that because I say, have a good day. And every once in a while, somebody, well, I need one. And I'm going to tell you, there's a time in my life, like, good, I hope you get one. I didn't say that, but that was my thought. I just got the coffee, hey, have a good one, and walk out. Curiosity makes you stop. By the way, because Philip did that, I've got a fleet car, and so we have to go to the dealership to get the oil change, which means you wait a long time. I never go to dealership that somebody's not reading the book. So because of that, I borrow it. It's like you like to read, which obviously they do. Yeah, I do. What are you reading? They tell you. What's your favorite thing to read? I've heard things like, I just love love stories. That's interesting. I like love stories too. Sometimes they'll ask me, what's your favorite love story? Well, I'll be honest with you, my favorite one's the cross of Jesus. Now, I've never had anyone mad, but that seems a lot easier to witness. I'll tell you something I do all the time. Tattoos are huge today. You see them everywhere. This is not scientific, it's just my experience. So I said in the past 10 years, I bet I've talked to maybe 500 or 600 people with a tattoo of a cross. I would say 9 out of 10 that I've talked to, I don't know what the survey would say, they're lost. And this is interesting. So it goes like this. I'll say something like, that's a neat tattoo you've got. The response is always the same. They might not be smiling when I walk up. That's a neat tattoo there. Well, thank you. Well, obviously they like it or they wouldn't have it. It's a neat tattoo you got. Well, thank you. I ask you a question. Is that some kind of spiritual significance? So this is about the last response I got. No, not really. My grandmother was a Catholic, and she passed away. I loved her, really, just close to her, so I got this in honor of her. And I said, well, that's a neat thing for a young man your age to get something in honor of their grandmother. I tell you what, though, that cross means a lot to me. The way I treat my wife or raise my son, I named her things. He said, really? Now, I know something he doesn't know because he says it means nothing to him besides his grandmother. What I know is this. We was in the gym, and what I know in my mind is we're about to start talking about the cross. It's the most powerful message on earth. And it's not just going to be me talking. You may not get saved, but when the cross is presented, there's a drawing power of the cross. The Holy Spirit's going to work on you. And so I began to go on the cross. And when I said that, he said, really? I said, well, not the cross you got, but there was a cross 2,000 years ago. Now think about this. The most important symbol of the Christian church. You got crosses on this church. The most important symbol. In our society, there's lost people who wear crosses. They have crosses tattooed on their body. And all you have to do is say, I like crosses too. Tell me about yours, or what does that mean to you? Let me say something, move on. You'll see things like this all the time. And once you get used to it, for example, the first time a few years ago when Georgia won their second national championship in 45 years, under Kirby, I told him, I said, well, let's be praying because we'll be talking about football tomorrow. And the next day, someone I didn't know was at a gas station, and he's excited. In fact, I'm pumping gas in my car, and somebody comes out of the convenience store. I don't even turn around, and they're barking like a dog. I know they're excited. Well, this guy's excited. He's dressed nice, has one of these big SUVs. He's kind of looking through the pump. And I said, "He set game." I said, "I saw it on TV." He says this. He says, "Have you ever seen anything so exciting?" And I went, "It was exciting. It's not the most important thing I've seen exciting." Well, what did you see? Well, he's asked me. So I said, well, when I was 19 years old, I went to a meeting, they called it Revival meeting, and a guy talked about Jesus. I said, that's probably the most exciting thing I've ever heard or seen. And you know what he went, well, yeah, it's not good darn football game. And I got the witness. You'll see things all the time, and I'll just say this. You say, I don't see that. Yeah, you do. You don't see it because you're not looking. This is weird. I was in Tifton teaching another thing besides this to about 85 people. And they had a meal, but it was at night, it's a Saturday night. And I was introduced to a lady over here, there's about 8 of them on the table, and that table. And when she crossed her leg, she probably about 70, on her ankle she had a butterfly, attached to the butterfly. And so when I got to this point, I asked this, I said, everybody look at me, don't look anywhere else. I said, y'all all know the lady who kind of headed up, I pointed, she headed up the meal, and they said, I said, we all know her. I said, y'all look at me. How many of y'all know she has a tattoo? Well, her husband raised his hand. No one else raised their hand. And I use that to say, that's what I'm talking about. I said, isn't it interesting that I didn't meet her before tonight, but she's got a tattoo of a butterfly on her ankle. No one else has paid attention to it. That's fairly normal. So let me just say this. Have you ever bought a car, new to you or brand new either way? Let's say it's a black Toyota Camry. You ever bought something like that? Within 2 weeks, you tell your spouse or a friend, everybody's bought a black Toyota Camry. No, they didn't. They had them before you had them. But now that you've got one, if you ever develop this, you sometimes go, Lord, you're wearing me out. I'm seeing crosses everywhere. I'm hearing people say, well, I could use a good day. You're around stuff where you're like, oh my goodness, this would be an easy thing to witness to. Once you get used to doing this, you'll be a lot like Jesus, who just instantly knew, I know he's God, but he instantly knew, if I ask her for water, she's going to be shocked. It's going to be a conversation that we can get into. So that's a great way to witness. Number 5, share your personal testimony. And I'm just going to list these with my life before Christ. And this needs to be brief. You don't have to go into too many details. This is my life before Christ. If this is true of you, normally it's true of all of us about Christ, I might just use words like my life before Christ. No matter what I said that was personal, I didn't have enough hope. I wonder what the purpose of life was. If you had a fear of death, I would use some of those things because that normally is universal that people have who don't know Christ. How I met Christ, my life after Christ.
Clearly present the gospel. Don't give your testimony without presenting the gospel. It's the God. Your testimony. You can say, "Boy, I tell you what, I met Jesus and he changed my life." That's good. That's not the gospel. Why? Because we just said earlier, the gospel is the death, burial, and resurrection.
Make sure you tell them, how did God change your life? Well, I heard about why he died. I heard about the sacrifice he made. So make sure the gospel is presented in there. And then as you give your testimony, give an invitation by asking the big question. Give an invitation by asking the big question. Don't ever go through the gospel and just say, hey, it's been good talking to you. Give an invitation. And the invitation may be something like this. The big question may be, hey, is there any good reason why you wouldn't commit your life to Christ right now? In other words, you've clearly explained the gospel, and you're asking a question. Hey, Christ died on the cross. And so let's say this guy's name is Bailey. Bailey, you believe Christ died on the cross? Well, I sure do. By the way, I would have answered yes to all these. It doesn't mean you're saved. It's just the way I grew up. I didn't doubt Christ died and all those things. So now if he says I don't, then you need to talk about it. If he never says he believes, he says, I can't grasp that. What you've done is you're sowing seeds, and you're just going to have to trust God to let those seeds plant. If it's somebody you see often, then you can say, hey, let's talk more about this. Because obviously, if they don't believe Christ died, they're not ready to make a commitment to him. But anyway, walk through those, what the gospel is, and ask some kind of question. If they say yes to all of this, it just means they intellectually believe in it. But ask them, is there any good reason why you wouldn't make that commitment today? Or some question like that brings them to a point where they have to tell you, no, I'm just not ready today, or they say, well, I'd like to do that, and then you can go into deeper details about what they would need to do. Number 6, using a gospel tract. You don't have to use a gospel tract. I will tell you, gospel tracts are great to use. I know the pastor's got 2 or 3. The Eternal Life tracts, all those tracts are good. Some of them are specific to age group. This is one of the best gospel tracts ever written. It's been around forever. It's from you get from the North American Mission Board, but it's a great gospel tract. Howard Ramsey, who's in heaven now, originally wrote this, and I knew him. That guy witnessed all the time. The great gospel tract goes into great theological details about what repentance, what faith, what the cross is. But there's a lot of good tracts. There's none better than this one. It's in fact, my boss, Tom Hammond, uses this all the time. It's a great tract. But I would say this. You can use personal testimony. You can use scripture. You can use a combination of things. I would have some gospel tracts with me. Here's why. Because if you have a brief conversation, like someone at a convenience store, they may not have time to go into too much detail. At least you can give it to them. And I stay in hotels sometimes. Brief conversation. I say, I'd like to give you something. And so at least they have it, and then you can begin to pray about maybe God using that tract to really impact them. Some things I would say about gospel tract: choose tracts that are simple but complete. Some tracts are better if you have time to go deeper in explanation. They're real short. I've got one I keep in my billfold. It's called a one-verse tract. It's Romans 6:23. I keep it in my billfold because it's small enough. I know I always have tracts with me. So sometimes with these, I'll be honest with you, a lot of times if I'm somewhere where somebody can't really talk, I may just say something like this. If it's a person waiting on me or checking out a hotel and there's a lot of people behind me and I know I can't talk long because there's people waiting, I may just say, hey, before I leave, I want to give you one of my favorite Bible verses. Now, someone this week may say, I don't want it. I've never had anyone say no. I have went back to hotels and said things like, hey, you were here about 6 weeks ago. I think I gave you a little Bible verse. Yeah, have you read it? I did. You got any questions about it? So just those type of things you can do with the tract and stuff. So choose tracts that are simple but complete. Use quality tracts. I say that, and that's a quality tract. I say that because sometimes you can download a tract off the internet and print it. It just normally doesn't look as good if it's printed on copy paper unless you got like a really nice copy. Or I would go ahead. Tracts are not that expensive. I'd buy them just because you're giving something quality. Pray over the tract. Pray over the tract. I don't do this every day, but a few times a week, some of the tracts I use, I just pray over them. I just say, Lord, I'll get me maybe 10 of them. I'll say, Lord, I have no clue who you're going to let me be around who gets this tract, but you already know. So I just pray that whoever I give it to you, that you would somehow touch their heart to receive it, to read it, and those type of things. And then I would tell you that if I know the name of somebody, because sometimes it's a customer service person, they've got a name tag, or if they tell me their name, I try to write it down or type it in my phone or something. so that I can keep praying. Lord, I may never see Susan again, but she heard the message and she's got a gospel tract. I'm going to trust you to do whatever you want to do in her life. Or sometimes I'll pray this, Lord, would you send somebody else in the next week or two, maybe to plant more seeds and so on. And then follow up on the track if possible. Follow up is simply this. Is somebody in my area that if I want to, I can say, okay, I went to this convenience store or whatever, and I know the person's name because their name's there. And it's a convenience store I could go back to. So there are some mornings I get up and I'll think in my mind, I'll say, before I go meet somebody 100 miles down the road, I'm going to stop at that convenience store and get a cup of coffee. And I'll pray something like this. Lord, Bill was working there. I had no clue if he still works there, but he was there last week. I got to give him the gospel tract. Lord, could you let him be there today? I'd love to talk to him. And so here's what happens with this. I've got places, it only can happen in my area because I don't live here. So witness one time I never see the person again. But in my area, maybe I give something to somebody, and this is my interpretation, I may be wrong. I think they're taking it because they're in customer service and they're nice. They don't seem that interested. Then you go back and you're friendly with them. If it's a person who's in customer service, especially at a place where they really, I mentioned Quick Trip. Quick Trip have people that Quick Trips are always the yard's mowed, it's clean, and they've got great customer service people. That's just the way it is across the state. I guess this must be a good company. So not every place has great customer service. So if I go back 3 or 4 times, I'm borrowing this from Jesus. He knew he hooked the lady by saying, give me something to drink. I may say something like this. I may call the person by name and say, hey, I know you're busy. I just want to tell you, you're really good at customer service. You know what they do? I don't care who they smile, they stand up straighter, because I'm going to assume this. Customer service is not an easy job today. And I have been in places where people buy coffee, whatever, and they say, well, I hope this coffee's hot because I bought one last Tuesday. It was cold before I got home. I live 3 minutes from here. Or the price of gas is too high. And I heard this the other day, and I'm thinking, I can't say this, but I'm thinking, man, you must be stupid if you think that lady sets the price of gas. But that's what they hear. And so if you're nice, you know what happens? You stand out. Because our culture, we don't live in a nice culture, to be honest with you. So it stands out. And so you can go back and follow up, and here's what you'll find sometimes. You'll find somebody who you thought, they ain't just not interested. Third conversation. But now you might pop back in, and this happened at my gym the other day. You might I used to go there a lot, but I popped in, I saw a guy I hadn't seen in a while. He said, I've been wondering when I would see you. How do I ask you a question? I was reading the end of the Gospel of John, and I'm thinking this. You didn't have a Bible 6 months ago, but now you're reading a Bible. And what you realize, he's not saved yet. You realize God's working on him because he's got an interest now that he didn't have 7 or 8 months ago. And that's the advantage of following up and stuff. The last thing is this. Remember, Jesus can make every follower a fisher. And I'm going to say this and turn it back to the pastor, let him press out if he's got anything to say. But those last 3 blanks, any believer can do this, and it's gold. It is amazing how this impacts an area. And every believer should do what I'm about to say, but here's the impact. In a local church, if you get enough people in a church doing this, a lot of you go to the same restaurants, you know some of the same people, you run into some of the same people, and what happens is, just say at a restaurant, somebody who's never been witnessed to, all of a sudden, in 6 weeks now, they're like, well, I've been 4 or 5 folks that talk about Jesus, this never happens. Well, what's happened is enough people in local churches decided, hey, this is our mission field, we're going to start reaching people. But every believer can do this. Number one, every believer can pray for a lost person by name. Can pray for a lost person by name. Which means this. If I meet someone this week, have a conversation, and it's in my circle of influence, I say, well, I've seen that guy wherever I see him. I just never have got to talk to him. So I'm assuming I won't see him again. He says his name, whatever his name is. He doesn't know this. I'm going to write his name on my prayer list. I'm going to start praying for him. Now, if you believe in the power of prayer, great things can happen. I will give you a warning, at least in my life. Sometimes I put a person's name on my list, and I know they need to be prayed for. I'm not broken for them, I just don't need to be prayed for. You pray enough, and sometimes it may take a while. You'll start praying, all of a sudden your voice cracks. All of a sudden you realize, God, you're not just working on him, you're working on me. And so that's a good thing. Second thing, every believer can invite that person they're praying for to church. Now, I don't have to tell you this, but I am. When you invite them to church, you're praying for them every day. Obviously, every time you see them, you're not inviting them to church. Or just say it's my next door neighbor. It's not that I'm praying for them, and every time I see them, I step outside their yard, hey, come to church. You're not doing that. You're inviting them one time. Then you're asking God, give me discernment on when I need to invite them again. And then there's some no-brainers. If I invite them, let's just say I started this in January, I invite them a couple times. Well, last month was a good time to invite them. Why? A little thing called Easter. It's a great time. They've got a third grade son. I didn't find when Vacation Bible School. There's a connection there. Hey, I don't know if your son's ever been to Vacation Bible School, but man, it's going to start such date in our church. And then I'm going to listen to the pastor, and sometimes the pastor may say, starting next month, I'm going to preach a series on whatever. I think, man, that series there, I think the person I'm praying for, I think they'd have an interest in that. So I'm looking for opportunities to invite that person. I'm praying for the person, I'm inviting the person. Let me pause and say this. I should do it regardless of it, anyone else does it or not. But here's the power of it. If 50 people in this church are doing it, what happens? What happens is you'll begin to notice we've got more visitors than we used to have. Well, we should. Why is that? Because we got 50, 60 people who they've got 2 or 3 people on their list now, and they're working this list, and that's why you're seeing some more baptisms, why you're seeing some more people coming to church. And just like we heard today, no matter what the pastor's preaching, what happens? He ends with an invitation to the gospel. So, I mean, this is a good thing. And the last thing is this. Every believer can share his or her story, that your personal testimony. So sooner or later, you want to get with that person, and you want to talk to them. And if you've done this, it's a pretty easy thing because you probably have invited them to church a few times. You probably had a few conversations about church or something of that nature. Maybe just say, how many of you ever wondered this? But you ever wonder why I invite you to church? And then I've had people say, yeah, or wondered that. Well, it's not as much about churches as about the fact that Jesus has changed my life. And so, and I would not be afraid to go to someone who I've known for 20 years and just say, I mean, like, right, cup of coffee, just call them and schedule a meeting. And I've done it this way before. I've done it where I know this puts them in good standing with me, where I say, hey, I'll tell you one reason I want to meet with you, and I just feel like I owe you an apology. What's up, man? Well, it's occurred to me that I've never told you the most important things I ever had in my life. I've never had one. I've had people say, man, don't feel bad about it. No, I feel like I need to talk to you about it. Do you mind if I tell you that now? I've never had a person say, nope, rather not. Yeah, go ahead. And talking about Jesus. And by the way, it also is a good thing for them to know that I'm saying, basically, I've blown it with you. I should have told you this story a long time ago. I've been telling a lot of people, and for some reason, I never have done it with that person. So anyway, that's the Go Fish. You go deeper in this, and any questions, I know the pastor can go a lot deeper than what we talked about today, talk about the other things. But I'm going to turn it over to you. So.